Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever the case may be. You've tuned in live again to another episode of the Daily Takeaway. This is episode 8, and it's a subject that I have sort of covered before, but less specifically, and it is about UFOs. And the subtitle is I know what I saw. I Know What I Saw is the name of a film which was released in 2009, I believe, by writer and director James Fox. And the title of his film was I Know What I Saw. Government and military officials reveal the truth about UFOs. And this was the first documentary I saw on the subject where it was just really well done. It was just really well compiled. It was less woo woo and make believe and sort of disbelievable. It was professionals from different walks of life coming forward and saying that they've seen something. And in most cases, the witnesses that had come forward seemed visibly jarred by their experience, and the majority of them seem to want answers. And you have to question their authenticity when somebody comes forward claiming to have seen something incredible, and they could be ridiculed for it, but they are coming forward nonetheless because they seek answers. And you have to think, there must be a reason why they want to come forward and seek answers. There has to be something relatively incredible have happened to them for them to need that, to need closure, to need answers. After all, we are a curious species. Um, we look at patterns and the mysteries of the world. We are curious, and we look for answers when we have questions. And there's no bigger answer, or no bigger question, I should say, than are we alone in the universe? For the skeptics in regards to UFOs, they believe we haven't been visited because the distance between us and the nearest star is so large that it would take, tens of years to get there, a fraction of the speed of light. I can understand why they would think that. It's a very sensible way of thinking, because they believe at our current level of technology, it isn't possible for us to travel to any other stars, because we'd be long dead before we got there. But is it correct to assume that if there are species in the universe besides our own, are they limited by the technology that we possess? Or are they more advanced? That's another question. Are they more advanced? If they are more advanced, then surely they have access to technologies that are far superior to ours. And you would have to assume that with that increased level of technology would come increased knowledge of the universe, what the universe is made of, and how to travel through it. So I think it's wrong to assume that if there is intelligence out there, that we're the biggest kid on the block and we're the smartest of the bunch. It's very vain. And purely by numbers, the universe isn't empty because we are here. And it's sort of, I can imagine it's rather naive to assume that we are the only ones, because that's an awful waste of space if we are. Turns out that technology and science has progressed. Our ability to observe the universe has progressed. And 10, 20, 30 years ago, scientists believe that, there weren't that many planets around other stars. We thought that we'd kind of gotten lucky with our solar system in that we had 8 planets, previously 9. Turns out that the estimation is that 100% of the stars that we see in the night sky have at least one planet around it. The majority do seem to be gas giants, though, or super Earths that are like 2 to 3 times the mass of the Earth, or 2 to 3 times the volume. Large planets that may be too large to have humanoids on there because the gravity would be too intense. But another issue is that these planets, they have to be a specific distance away from their host star. The host star has to be a particular kind of star, a main sequence star that's not too hot, not too cold, not too big, and not too small. The reason why you can't have it being too hot, because then the predominant ultraviolet radiation would just sterilize the planets, so nothing could grow. Especially if you were too close, they'd be sterilized. They'd be too hot for water. If they're too far away from the host star, then water would be frozen. It seems that the key to life is water, but the key to life is liquid water. So how many planets in the observable universe, or I should say, how many planets around these stars that are the right kind of star, that are the right distance away from that star, that have had not too many catastrophic events to allow a intelligent civilization to flourish? Because forget not that the dinosaurs were the dominant species on this planet for 70 million years. They were not particularly intelligent. They couldn't, A, they didn't have opposable thumbs, and B, they weren't building, technology. They were just, it was a hunter versus prey for 70 million years. So having time isn't an indication of the right sort of events unfolding for a smart, intelligent being or beings to flourish. We may be incredibly lucky. When you add up all of the lucky factors that are needed, you certainly do reduce the number of potential stars and potential planets in the universe, because you've got to consider the size of the star, the type of star, how hot the star is, or how cold the star is, how far away the potential planet is from that star, either too hot or too cold, would have a different Goldilocks zone. And the Goldilocks zone is just, it's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right. The Goldilocks zone will change around certain stars. It would be a different distance depending on the star. Then you've got how much water is on that planet. Because if it's all water, then you'll just have marine life. If it's half and half and you have water and land, then you have a chance to have, fish and mammals. If it's all land, then there may not be enough water to sustain life. So there are a lot of variables that need to be in place, and with each subsequent variable, the likelihood of life existing on that planet reduces. So I can understand when a scientist says it's unlikely, because it is. It's unlikely that another species from another planet, perhaps not even in our Milky Way, is visiting us. A, how would they find us? As we see from science and astronomy, astrophysics, and people that use telescopes on a daily basis, space is dark. When something is not near a host star, relatively near like a planet, they are very difficult to see, even when you're in that star's sort of local group. Saturn is not easy to see. It just looks like another star. Imagine coming from another star from far away to know that one of these planets has life. It does seem difficult and quite an undertaking to have a system of drones, perhaps, that would go to every star in their host galaxy and monitor, through physics and so on, how much the sun wobbles, and what's the benefit of seeing how much the sun or star wobbles? Well, when a star wobbles, you know that it's being slightly tugged on by another heavenly body, another planet, because the center of gravity between 2 points would be slightly different depending on how large the star is and how large the planet is. A smaller planet will have a lesser tug and so on. My point is, could you imagine how difficult it would be surveying all of the stars? You would have to constantly keep scanning for planets. Yes, sure, if they're a sophisticated species and they have technology that's better than ours, perhaps scanning a solar system is relatively easy and they can find the planets straight away. Or maybe it's not as easy as we think because space is dark, and you would need drones surveying a solar system for some time for them to be able to find everything. And then you've got to send those drones to each and every planet and observe. Or perhaps they just skip all of that and look for the planets that have the right signatures. Because you can scientists can now scan the atmospheres of planets when they transition in front of their host star. The light that passes through that atmosphere will have certain absorption lines. The absorption lines are just if an element is present in the atmosphere, then some of the wavelengths of that light will be absorbed by those elements or molecules, which are then picked up by the telescope, and we can determine, like they have just done recently with Wolf 35b or whatever it was called, Earth-like planet, that it has water vapor in the atmosphere. So perhaps that's just what another civilization would do. They would scan the atmospheres, and hello, guten heute Leute and pads. Perhaps that's just what they would do. I'm definitely a believer and a skeptic all at the same time. When I go down a particular rabbit hole of skepticism, I believe more and more in skepticism, my skeptic side. But when I go down the rabbit hole that says, something is going on, there has to be explanations for why people have seen these things that have been visiting us that demonstrate a level of technology that we don't possess. What gives? But it's difficult. It's difficult for a scientific person. I'm not a scientific person in that I have a scientific job or a degree. I just think very practically about issues, and it seems more and more unlikely when I consider all of the factors that an ancient civilization from somewhere in the universe is visiting us. What for? For what purpose? Is it in the case of body snatchers where people just go missing because they need some DNA? Or in the case of cattle mutilation where they need to take samples? I can't see, though, how... I can't see the purpose of a species that would come all of this way just to take samples from a cow and then leave it dead. Like, I don't understand the point. Like, surely there'd be easier ways for them to get samples. Anyway, it's difficult because when you consider the numbers, like, we do seem to be, as I say we as in like Earth and humans and all the life on Earth, very fortunate because we have popped up on this planet, luckily, in the middle of catastrophic events. The previous catastrophic event was the Tunguska meteor shower. Carbonite says, I believe the sheer scale of the universe means there must, in capital letters, must be alien life out there. But whether it is beings flying around or whether it's just somewhere in a distant galaxy, there is another species like us that has evolved. Who can say? Yeah. If the universe is infinite, then the possibilities are infinite. So there is another us out there somewhere. Because mathematically speaking, it has to be. There has to be. But are they visiting us? That's the question. I think it's unlikely that there's a species out there that's just flying around our skies observing what we're doing. Unless, as the UFO believers believe, that there is a galactic federation where there's a whole community of species that know one another. And they're on the lookout for new members. And the new kids on the block, Earth, humanoids, detonating nuclear devices. As one scientist said, and I quote, "We're playing with matches." That was Michio Kaku, who 5-10 years ago would have laughed at you for thinking about UFOs, and now he's a hardened believer, which is weird. I can understand that a civilization would look at Earth and think, if we're not careful, these guys could blow anybody up, including themselves. So maybe they're visiting just to be like, well, like we visit the zoo. What are we up to? It could be their form of entertainment, their reality TV. But the only reason why I believe in UFOs is because I've seen some of my own. Is it possible that I'm misidentified or saw an illusion or a sequence of events that in my head played out a particular way, but in actuality didn't? Maybe. But the benefit of my sightings is that they are corroborated by somebody else witnessing exactly the same events. So I know that I wasn't seeing things. I know that I wasn't, hallucinating. Because it's very unlikely that two people hallucinate exactly the same thing. Because if you take magic mushrooms and somebody else takes magic mushrooms and you get them to look at, I don't know, a pattern on a wall, both of them will see the pattern, but the effects of the drugs will affect them differently. So they would both see different things. So I don't think it's possible for two people to hallucinate exactly the same thing. Which then sort of indirectly corroborates a lot of UFO sightings that military personnel have had. When multiple military witnesses come forward saying that they've all seen exactly the same thing, it's very unlikely that if they were hallucinating, and why military personnel should suddenly just start hallucinating when a UFO is about is weird. But if they all see the same thing, describe the same thing, and experience the same thing, then it's very unlikely that they're hallucinating. So I'm going to get some I'm going to get some articles up for us to look at, because it is an interesting subject. So let me just activate the camera for those people that are on stream. I'll get rid of the title. We've got the Unidentified Flying Object Wikipedia page, and for some of you that follow the subject will know that the name has changed. The military changed the acronym because they wanted to distance themselves from UFOs, or the word UFO, because it was too highly ridiculed. A lot of people just didn't take it seriously when somebody mentioned the word UFO, so they changed it to UAP, which means Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. It says here that it is any perceived aerial phenomenon that cannot be immediately identified or explained. True. So anything that we see in the air, the sky, that we can't readily identify, or it's too far away for us to get an accurate sort of witness of what it is, like an accurate identification, then by definition it is unexplained or unidentifiable. It's flying and it's an object, so it's by definition a UFO, but that doesn't mean that it's alien. A lot of UFOs these days, irritatingly, just lights in the sky of stars. Some people incorrectly identify stars, planes, helicopters, drones, Chinese lanterns, hot air balloons, airships, clouds, mylar balloons, a whole fleet of UFOs can just be, 100 mylar balloons having been let loose, and they're floating up in the sky 3 miles up, and people think, oh my god, there's an entire swarm of UFOs. What's the likelihood that we're just being invaded, or there's a party somewhere and a lot of balloons were let loose? I believe the second one. On investigation, most UFOs are identified as known objects or atmospheric phenomena, while a small number remain unexplained. True. There was a UFO report called Project Blue Book, which was spearheaded by J. Allen Hynek, who was, I believe, an astrophysicist. So if we can get, if we can find Alan, is it A-L-E-N, A-L-L-E-N? Yes, here we go. Dr. J. Allen Hynek was an American astronomer, professor, and ufologist. He spearheaded Project Blue Book, which was the Air Force's study into the UFOs. Was the code name for the systematic study of unidentified flying objects by the US Air Force in March 1952. So 5 years after Roswell. And it was terminated in 1969. In parallel, there was another project that ran in secret in parallel with Project Blue Book, which name escapes me, but there is another project study that went on that took the subject far more seriously. Here we see it says here, projects similar nature such as Project Sign. Okay, Project Sign established in 1947 and Project Grudge in 1948. So Project Sign was in the year of Roswell, and Project Grudge was a year later. So if we check what these are, Project Sign was the US government study of UFOs undertaken by the Air Force and active for most of 1948. Its precursor to Project Grudge. Project Grudge, I believe, was the more serious investigation. The public investigation that they went on television and were interviewed was Project Blue Book. Carbonite also said, I think if we are of interest, it's only because of nuclear power and the relative primitive developments we've made that might concern them. We are something to be worried about if we don't end up blowing ourselves up. Yeah, that's exactly what I think. I mean, we are like kids with matches. We are tribal. We bicker. We're fighting over resources. We have selfish goals, selfish aims. We are materialistic. We want things for ourselves. We want as much money as we can acquire. We can afford to live on less, but we want to earn more. We cut corners to earn a bigger profit. We don't care about the environment, although we pretend as if we do, as evident of people when they go to the beach, they just leave their rubbish everywhere. If we looked at ourselves objectively as a species, as a whole, we are practically like a virus on Earth. We behave like viruses. We consume, and then we wreck the environment that we're in. And the plan now is to move to another planet. Do we think that our behavior would stop there, or would this new planet form exactly the same selfish acquisition of wealth, power, resources, and then that planet becomes completely consumed and we do it again? That's how I view humanity, unfortunately. There are great people out there, there are good people out there, but good people don't rule the world. The powerful elite rule the world, and they don't get to be powerful and elite without that nature. So to go back to Project Blue Book, Project Blue Book was the US military's public investigation into UFOs. They wanted to let the public know that, look, there's nothing to it. Everything that we've seen can be explained away by, simpler explanations. One of the explanations that J. Allen Hynek had to give in regards to a case that, by all accounts, was completely unexplainable. He was told to give an explanation of swamp gas. And he said that it was light refracting off of swamp gas, and it could give the illusion of movement. And in a later interview, when he was no longer working for the Air Force or Project Blue Book, he said that was his most embarrassing moment, the one that he regrets and felt stupid saying even when he was saying it. His arm was twisted. The military told him to say it. The military also told him to wantonly explain away every case because they didn't want to rock the boat. They didn't want to get people worried. They didn't want the switchboards being clogged up with reports of UFOs and panicked individuals just in case the Russians at that moment decided to invade. Come on now. And this Project Blue Book was basically, the Air Force had already had a biased opinion on what the phenomenon was. They had already come to their conclusion long before the project had finished. Excuse me. And it says here, thousands of UFO reports were collected, analysed, and filed. As a result of the Condon report, which we'll check in a second, which concluded that the study of UFOs was unlikely to yield major scientific discoveries, and a review of the report by the National Academy of Sciences, Project Blue Book, was terminated in 1969. The Condon Committee was the informal name of the University of Colorado's UFO project, a group funded by the Air Force in 1966 to 1968 to study unidentified flying objects under the direction of physicist Edward Condon. The result, formerly titled Scientific Study of Unidentified Flying Objects, known as the Condon Report, appeared in 1969. After examining hundreds of UFO files, the Air Force's Project Blue Book, and from civilian UFO groups, from the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP, and the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, APRO, they said that the study of UFOs was unlikely to yield major scientific discoveries. The problem with the Condon Committee, it was spearheaded by somebody that had already reached his conclusion long before the project had even begun. So he was just dismissing everything because he had already made up his mind, or perhaps he'd already been told what his mind was. Project Blue Book. A lot of the naysayers and the skeptics will say, well, look, the U.S. Air Force investigated UFOs with Project Blue Book, and they said nothing is out of the ordinary. So they will say, okay, well, I believe UFOs don't exist because I believe Project Blue Book and the Air Force. Why would they lie to me? The Air Force definitely aren't good at their job, in the sense that it took them 3 investigations into Roswell to come up with a conclusion that the reason why people saw bodies, crashed vehicles at Roswell was because they mistook the events at Roswell, for events that happened 5 to 20 years later. And when they investigated any secret projects during 1947 in an attempt to explain Roswell, they could find no projects active in the military which would explain the things that people saw in 1947. They could only later explain Roswell for projects that suddenly sprung up 5 to 20 years later, which could explain the events of Roswell, despite the fact that the eyewitnesses to Roswell would also have had to have been the eyewitnesses to the other secret projects for them to then confuse the two, and I think that's very unlikely. Project Blue Book ended. It had collected 12,618 UFO reports and concluded that most of them were misidentifications of natural phenomena, clouds, stars, etc., or conventional aircraft. According to the National Reconnaissance Office, a number of reports could be explained by flights of the formerly secret reconnaissance planes U-2 and A-12. 701 reports were classified as unexplained, even after stringent analysis. The UFO reports were archived and are available under the Freedom of Information Act, but names and other personal information of all witnesses have been redacted. We don't want to dox them, do you? The Robertson Panel. This is interesting. In July 1952, after a build-up of hundreds of sightings over the previous few months, a series of radar detections coincident with visual sightings were observed near the National Airport in Washington, D.C. After much publicity, these sightings led the CIA to establish a panel of scientists headed by Dr. H.P. Robertson, a physicist at Caltech, which included various physicists, meteorologists, and engineers, and one astronomer, J. Allen Hynek. The Robertson Panel first met on January the 14th, 1953, in order to formulate a response to the overwhelming public interest in UFOs. Ruppelt, Hynek, and others presented the best evidence, including movie footage, including movie footage that had been collected by Blue Book. After spending 12 hours reviewing 6 years of data, the Robertson Panel concluded that most UFO reports had prosaic explanations and that could all be explained with further investigation, which they deemed not worth the effort. Imagine that. By the way, we could explain what these are, but we don't want to. So, no. In their final report, they stressed that low-grade, unverifiable UFO reports were overloading intelligence channels, with the risk of missing a genuine conventional threat to the US. Therefore, they recommended the Air Force de-emphasize the subject of UFOs and embark on a debunking campaign to lessen public interest. They suggested debunkery through the mass media, including Walt Disney Productions, using psychologists, astronomers, and celebrities to ridicule the phenomena and put forward prosaic explanations. Furthermore, civilian UFO groups should be watched because of their potential great influence on mass thinking. The apparent irresponsibility and the possible use of such groups for subversive purposes should be kept in mind. So basically, people that believe in UFOs were being monitored because they might make people believe in UFOs. What makes the UFOs believable is that I think deep down, some people know something's up. When the military are acting shadily, there has to be a reason. I know the military act shadily anyway because they've got a lot of secrets to keep. But it's interesting. It is the conclusion of many researchers that the Robertson Panel was recommending controlling public opinion through a program of official propaganda and spying and ridicule. So they also believe these recommendations help shape Air Force policy regarding UFOs, not only immediately afterward, but also to present day. There is evidence that the panel's recommendations were being carried out for the last 2 decades after its conclusions were issued. In December 1953, a joint Army-Navy-Air Force regulation made it a crime for military personnel to discuss classified UFO reports with unauthorized persons. Violators faced up to 2 years in prisons and or fines of up to $10,000. So they're being fined for saying what they've seen. They're being fined to say, yeah, I saw something. Yeah, I saw something with my own freedom of my own natural eyes, their mind to see things with. And what I gazed upon, I'm now being fined for saying I've gazed upon it. It's incredibly stupid of the US Navy and the military forces to potentially, if we believe that they are US tech, to dangle that carrot in front of their own military personnel and the public, and then threaten them afterwards. Just don't dangle it in front of us. You've got a whole planet to go and test your secret technology. You can do it. I can see why Area 51 is in the middle of the Nevada desert, because there's no point, there's nothing around. But it's like, or New Mexico desert, isn't it? New Mexico. Anyway, it's like 50 miles until the nearest civilization. So you have a decent area there to test your vehicles without anybody seeing them. Same thing, with like remote areas of Chile, probably remote areas of Argentina, Africa. Of course, you've got to get your technology there, but there are a lot of the remote areas of Australia too. Why dangle that carrot in front of people and then threaten them for saying that they've seen the very thing that the military have dangled in front of them? I don't see the point. It's like, I don't know, you waving your hand in somebody's face and say, every time you look at my hand, I'm going to punch you. If you're waving it in front of their face, they can't not see the thing that you're doing. So then they're just going to punch. You're just going to punch them. The aftermath of the Robertson Panel here, it says, in his book, Ruppelt described the demoralization of Project Blue Book staff as the stripping of their investigative duties following the Robertson Panel's jurisdiction. As an immediate consequence of the Robertson Panel's recommendations in 1953, the Air Force issued Regulation 200-2, ordering Air Base officers to publicly discuss UFO incidents only if they were judged to have been solved, and to classify all other unsolved cases to keep them out of the public eye. The same month, investigative duties started to be taken on by the newly formed 462nd Air Intelligence Squadron of Air Defense Command. They were assigned the task of investigating only the most important UFO cases with intelligence or national security implications. These cases were deliberately siphoned away from Project Blue Book, leaving Blue Book to deal with more trivial reports. General Nathan Twining, who started Project Sign in 1947, was now the Air Force Chief of Staff. In August 1954, he was to further codify the responsibilities of the 4,602nd by issuing an updated Air Force Regulation 200-2. In addition, UFOs called UFOBs were defined as any airborne object which, by performance, aerodynamic characteristics, or unusual features do not conform to any presently known aircraft or missile, or which cannot be positively identified as a familiar object. It's quite interesting. I did hear about General Nathan Twining, and General Nathan Twining, I think he wrote a memo. So I'm going to try and get this up for you because it's very interesting. Nathan Twining memo. And it's very, very interesting to read. Let's see if we can find it. It's got a short here. The phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious. The head of the U.S. Air Force Material Command, he believes something was going on, but these reports are so tiny that they're hardly read. They can be hardly read. So that's what General Nathan Twining said, that it's not visionary or fictitious. And he's the head of the Air Force. It's very interesting. So, when I say I think things are going on, it's because of individuals like J. Allen Hynek, who, while working, had to keep his mouth shut. When he was retired, he opened his mouth and he said, this, and this went on. They told me to shush. They told me to say this. They told me to say that. Is it my belief that UFOs exist? Yes. Is it my belief that these UFOs are intelligently controlled objects that are not of this earth? Yes. Why didn't you say this when you were working for Project Blue Book? He couldn't. He would lose his job. He'd lose his job, he'd probably be shunned, he'd probably be humiliated, he'd probably be ridiculed, he'd probably be arrested. Come to think of it, the US would just arrest him, fine him, put him in jail. I mean, look what they did to, the whistleblowers recently of, who was that whistleblower that used to work for the CIA, and he revealed what what Facebook and stuff are getting up to. And he's been on the run ever since. I can't remember his name. So imagine what they'd do to somebody who's potentially withholding one of the world's biggest secrets. We'd probably never hear from him again. I think the more I talk about UFOs with people, like my friends and family, at first they are dismissive. At first they just think, yeah, well, But because they're smart, they do a little digging of their own. And as the result of all of this digging that they've done by themselves, they come back and go, do you know what? Something's up. But something is up. Recently, an individual by the name of Ross Coulthart, who is, if I remember correctly, an American, sorry, not an American, an Australian investigative reporter. And he started reporting UFOs, not intentionally, because he believed and he thought the whole thing was hocus pocus, hickory dickory hogwash. He now believes. He's quite an interesting fellow because he's just a journalist and he just wants to find answers. So he probably asks a lot of the right questions. And as a result, he's ended up writing a book called In Plain Sight, an investigation into UFOs and impossible science. It was a bestseller. Ross Coulthart has a Twitter, investigative journalist and author in Plain Sight, has a podcast. He's been interviewed many times, and he seems interesting because he was a hardened skeptic. And now he's a hardened believer. Now, does that mean anything? No. It just means that this one man by the name of Ross didn't believe, and now he does. Is that breaking news? No. But it's interesting that hardened skeptics that live by science and hold science in high regard and do their due diligence and investigate and ask questions and uncover and form an opinion based on the evidence that's presented. When individuals do that and they do their own research and look into the subject, they all come back going, something's up. But we don't know what that something is. And that's the annoying thing. Because it could be aliens. That something could be aliens. It could be the US. There's many possibilities. Is it alien? Is it a civilization from another planet, from another solar system, around another star? That's one. Is it us? Are we in possession of this technology? But the US and other countries have kept it secret that they are in possession of a technology that can render petrol obsolete. Is it us, but a different sort of species? Is it hidden from us? Are they earthlings, but not humans? Are they hiding in the waters? Are they hiding in the caves? 70% of the Earth's surface is covered in water. And we've discovered less than 5% of the oceans. There's a lot of places to hide. especially when we can't go under the water without, a lot of protection from, submarines. Not particularly mobile. And it's not like they're all made of glass so we can see everything around us. Would you even want to see everything around you when you're under the sea? Some big kraken just mouth opening, like stuff of nightmares. Is it? It really is. I guess it just boils down to, is it us or is it them? If it's us, then the US has been in possession, or a civilization has been in possession of a technology which can run circles around what we currently have today. So they'd have to be in possession of a level of technology that would render global warming, petrol, the energy crisis obsolete. They would be irrelevant. But could you imagine the amount of families that are in oil? Their incomes would be shattered as soon as they discover that petrol is no longer needed. Their families and their fathers and their fathers' fathers and so on. Everything that they'd fought for to control would now be worthless to a degree. That's a big secret. Or is it, it definitely would be a big secret. It definitely would make the world hate America or whatever nation is in possession of this a lot. Or is it other, as in alien? Are we being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial vehicles piloted by intelligent beings from another planet? Are we alone in the universe? The frustrating thing about UFOs and the subject of UFOs is there is a lot of crap out there. There's a lot of stuff that muddies the water. There's a lot of liars. There are a lot of charlatans. There are a lot of hoaxers. There are a lot of greedy individuals that want to make TV shows about UFOs, and the shows that they make about UFOs are just complete rubbish, dramatized crap. There are movies about this sort of stuff that also ridicule the subject, and then they change the question of, are we alone in the universe? Are we being visited to Hollywood eye candy? You just don't get any answers from this topic. You don't. What you tend to get are more questions. Why don't we know? Why isn't science taking a more active approach in investigating this? Why is the military stopping science from doing that? Science can only follow where the money is. And if there's no money in UFOs, science won't investigate UFOs because they won't have funding to investigate, to do the science. Science and progress can only go where the money is. And if money is being funneled into other things, that's where science goes. What is the reason why is there no money in UFOs? Is it because of the disinformation campaigns that they did in the 50s and 60s and later? There are questions. Unfortunately, we won't get answers to these questions because the people that know, that are in the know, we'd never discover who they are. They're probably so well hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and secrecy that those individuals that know, no one will ever know. It's like it would be a case of need to know versus you don't need to know versus you don't know anything, you don't even know where to start. asking questions, and you won't get any answers anyway. So really, it's like banging your head against the wall, UFOs, because you're just going to be a small fish in a big pond, and there are a lot of sharks out there, and you're going to be like, please give me some answers, and they're going to be like, no. It's irritating. But if you are intrigued by the subject of UFOs, then I would recommend watching a couple of films that I've watched that I believe are pretty good. Two of which are by James Fox. James Fox has done a few UFO documentaries. Originally, he had no care in the world for UFOs, but he's done some. He's done I Know What I Saw, which he did in 2009, which was a TV movie documentary, re-released in 2014. He's also done another documentary on UFOs 2 years ago called The Phenomenon. And The Phenomenon is also another very good film. He's done other documentaries, UFOs 50 Years of Denial in 1997, Out of the Blue in 2003, I Know What I Saw in The Phenomenon. Those are great. There are some books that I hear are fantastic reads. What was the first book? It was let me get the name for you. It was by Stanton T. Friedman, who was a physicist and ufologist. He wrote the book Crash at Corona, which is, it says here the title, Crash at Corona, the US Military Retrieval and Cover-Up of a UFO. This was released in 1992. That's a good book to read. Passport to Magnolia, I think it is. Magonia, I apologise. From Folklore to Flying Saucers, apparently is another incredible book by Jacques Vallée. And Jacques Vallée, well, I'm not quite sure how he pronounces his name. It may be Jacques Vallée. Jacques Vallée is internet pioneer, computer scientist, and venture capitalist, author, ufologist, and astronomer, currently residing in San Francisco. Paranormal research, according to Vallée, he cited an unidentified flying object, over his Pontoise home in 1955. 6 years later, in 1961, while working on the staff of the French Space Committee, Vallée claims to have witnessed the destruction of the tracking tapes of an unknown object orbiting the Earth. The particular object was a retrograde satellite. That is, a satellite orbiting the Earth in the opposite direction to the Earth's rotation. At the time he observed this, there were no rockets powerful enough to launch a satellite, so the team was quite excited as they assumed that the Earth's gravity had captured a natural satellite, an asteroid. He claimed that an unnamed superior came and erased the tape. These events contributed to Vallée's lifelong interest in the UFO phenomenon. Vallée began to correspond with Amy Michel, who became a key mentor and research collaborator in 1958. I do like Vallée because he's very smart. He seems to know what he's talking about. He says here, in 1969, Jacques Vallée's conclusions had changed, and he publicly stated that the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, was too narrow and ignored too much data. He began exploring commonalities between UFOs, cults, religions, movements, demons, angels, ghosts, cryptid sightings, and psychic phenomena. His speculation about the potential links was first detailed in his book Passport to Magonia. As an alternative to the extraterrestrial visitation hypothesis, Vallée has suggested a multi-dimensional visitation hypothesis. What he's basically saying is that these extraterrestrial hypotheses were that extraterrestrials could potentially be from anywhere. The entities could be multidimensional beyond space-time, thus could coexist with humans yet remain undetected. Which is interesting. Is there any proof of this? No. Is there any proof of anything? No. And some might say that the severe lack of proof is proof enough. Is proof that nothing's going on. Alternatively, some might say that the severe lack of proof is proof that someone is covering things up very successfully, which is true. It's very odd that all of the good data, all of it, keeps getting pinched by men in black, people turning up that we assume are military personnel. And we assume that because a lot of people that are in the know and have seen and handled sensitive data have said 2 or 3 individuals who did not name themselves, but we were warned that they would be coming, told us we were all sworn to secrecy. They confiscated all of the evidence and took it back with them. That happens all the time. Again, if it's the military testing military vehicles in front of its military and then threatening them, it just seems really silly. It just seems like a really silly way of going about things. Forget not that the Central Intelligence Agency was made right after Roswell. Some might say, well, that's a coinkydink. And it is a coincidence that in the weeks and months following Roswell, suddenly the CIA is made. And I know another agency was too. I think it was either the Air Force or it was another agency was made immediately afterwards. The reason why I'm having a second podcast about UFOs is because I'm actually passionate about the subject. But I'm not one of these believers that will wear tinfoil hats and say, oh, beings from Alpha Centauri, Zeta Reticuli are visiting us and we come in peace. You know, I'm genuinely curious. And the reason why I'm generally curious is because I saw something that I can't explain. Now, is that worthy of me being interested in UFOs just because I can't explain it? No. But what I saw on more than one occasion defies explanation to me. And I'm the sort of individual that will look at something quite objectively and try to see it from a point of view of, could this be that? Could this be this? Because I believe perspective is very important. Our views and opinions can change very quickly when our perspective is different. For instance, if we're looking at an object in the sky, rather than just looking at the object and saying, wow, that looks weird, it's unrecognizable, it must be a UFO, I look at the question of, why is it unrecognizable? Is it because it's too far away? Is it because it's too far away that the ocular angle is so small that the resolution is too low for the camera to pick it up? So it's just a blob. Same as, could it be a balloon? How fast is it moving? I want to look at it from a different perspective of, rather than just staring at eyes on and taking it at face value, asking questions about what it could possibly be before making the assumption that it's extraterrestrial. The reason why perspective is important is because it's very easy to get caught up in how we see the world. And how we see the world is very different to how other people see it. So it's a useful skill to detach ourselves from our own belief systems, our own perspectives, and look at it from somebody else's point of view, or a potential other point of view. For instance, just for the sake of conversation, people don't realize how difficult living with depression is. They just think, and I've probably been guilty of this, cheer up, mate. Not the end of the world. It's not that bloody simple. Just as looking at things in ufology is not that simple. There are a lot of contributing factors. And I have a story about the importance of perspective. And it comes from an American teacher. And this American teacher is teaching teenagers. And on this particular day, he was going to teach his students the importance of perspective. And I don't mean 2-point perspective, artists, vanishing points, and, why things look smaller as they're further away. Perspective as like looking at something from a different point of view. Seeing a topic or subject from an alternative angle. Basically seeing both sides of the coin. And he did this by jumping up on his desk. And he jumped up on his desk and then he asked the students, "Why did I just do that?" And one of the students in the back goes, "Because you're a nutter, sir." And the students start laughing. He's like, "No." And he calls out a student at the front of the class. For the sake of argument, we're going to call him Dave. He calls out Dave. He says, "Dave, as I'm standing above you now, looking down upon you, does it make you feel small?" He's like, "Yes." Dave's like, "Yes." "And when you feel small," says the teacher, "do you feel confident?" And Dave says, "No." "And when you don't feel confident, Dave, how do you feel you're going to do during your exams? Do you think you're going to do better or worse?" And Dave says, "Worse." "And when you feel like when you feel small and you don't feel good enough and you don't feel successful enough, and do your dreams seem possible?" And he says, "No." "And your dreams don't feel possible. You don't feel confident. You feel small. How does that make you feel? How does that make you look at the world?" And he leaves Dave to think about it for a few seconds. And the teacher jumps down and says, "Jump up on my desk." So Dave gets out of his seat and jumps up on his desk. Dave's now looking down at the teacher, and the teacher says, "How do you feel now, Dave? Do you feel bigger, better?" He's like, "Yes." You feel higher up and stronger, and yes. "And now that you feel better and you feel more confident, Dave, how do you think you're going to do during your exams now?" And Dave says, "I think I'm going to do better." And it's like, "Well, you feel you're going to pass?" And Dave's like, "Yes." "What about your future, Dave? Like, do you feel better about your future?" Dave's like, "Yes, yes, I feel better." "Thank you, Dave. Sit back down." So Dave jumps back down and sits back in his seat, and the teacher gets to the front of the class and he says, "What happened there, class?" The same kid that had, sent out a comedic remark at the start is like, "He brainwashed him, sir." And the students start laughing again. And he's like, "No. What you've just witnessed there is the value of perspective. Dave looked at two situations, or the same situation, from two differing perspectives, and it changed his outlook. It changed his opinions. It changed how he felt. It changed how he regarded himself and what he was looking at. The value of perspective cannot be undervalued. It's very important to be able to detach yourself from your current situation, look at it from an alternative point of view, to draw differing conclusions. When you deal with ufology, you have a lot of absolutes. You have people that believe, and will believe without question. They believe exactly what they've been told. They've formed an opinion. You cannot shake them. It's much like religion in that sense, that people believe blindly in God, even though there's a humongous lack of evidence to support the fact that God exists. Same thing with UFOs. There's a humongous lack of evidence that supports the fact that UFOs exist. And you present that lack of evidence to somebody who believes blindly. Does it change their opinion? No, because they haven't learned a key skill of being able to detach themselves from the here and the now, and allow themselves to look at a situation from another perspective and form a conclusion based off of differing evidence. They don't have a belief system based off of evidence. They're probably anecdotal evidence. Pardon? Okay, well, what do you want me to do about it? Right, I'm just going to go quickly get this delivery. I will be 2 seconds. I had to go and answer the door because somebody couldn't answer the door even though they were right next to the door. I apologise. Anyway, where was I? The importance of perspective. And a lot of the believers in UFOs, despite your best efforts to present sort of an alternative possibility to what they think that they saw, they take it. I'm out of breath because I've run down 4 flights of stairs and up 4 flights of stairs. They take it offensively because, in a way, when you try to debunk or provide a sort of alternative narrative, they get offended because, in a way, you're kind of saying they might be wrong. And a lot of insecure people don't like to be told that they're wrong because that makes them feel bad. But they've forgotten that you only learn in life by making mistakes and being wrong, doing something wrong. Then you learn to do it right. But in adulthood, people just get so stubborn that the attitude that they have to life when they were younger, being told that they're wrong, and maybe it's because when you're kids, you're laughed at for being wrong sometimes by your peers. But being wrong is very important because you improve. When science is wrong, they endeavour to keep going to find the right answer. When a person is wrong, they learn what's right. And in ufology, the believers believe so hard that when you tell them they're wrong, they take it offensively, they lash out. In the case of Reddit's a horrible place to be on anyway, toxic, in my opinion. I have spent 2 years trying to provide alternative suggestions to some sightings, and a lot of the time, you just get a lot of hate back. Oh, you're such a skeptic. You're the problem with this. You're the problem with life. You refuse to accept things. Yet, when people accuse others of what they tend to accuse others of what they are themselves guilty of. That's what I see a lot of. It's quite weird that with ufology, it's more popular to come up with an irrational claim of UFOs than it is to come up with a rational explanation. Nobody likes a skeptic. Nobody likes a debunker. Nobody likes the person that comes in here and says, "Oh, by the way, it's this. I can see why you confused yourselves and thought it was something else, but it's actually this, and here's why." Especially a skeptic that can back up his skepticism with evidence and prove that he's ran investigations, investigated a sighting, and then drawn up a conclusion which differs to everyone else's, gets hate for it. I had done that so many times on Reddit subreddit for UFOs that the majority of responses I get are people that argue with me, saying, "Why would you think it's a balloon? It's clearly not." Or, "Why would you think it's aliens? There's something in the sky. It must be an intelligently controlled vehicle from a faraway planet, light years away. What's more plausible? A child has let go of a balloon and it's floated a mile, 2 miles up in the air, and it's reflecting sunlight, and we see it as a glowing silver orb because sunlight's reflecting off of it. Or it's an alien spacecraft." It just seems weird to me that they jump to the latter. You'll see, if I show you the state of Reddit UFOs, you will see that there's a pattern that goes on here. In that the stuff that people post, like this person, unedited video of Long Island, New York. He's looking at something fly. That to me looks like a bird doing circles, even though it's really difficult to see. That to me looks like it's just a bird circling, but because it's white and bright at some point, it's high contrast. But that, even to me, there looks like a bird, just a hawk or something spinning around. You'll get other things like this, where it's just lights in the sky. Another light in the sky. This one here is of a rocket launch, but they see something Death Star looking UFO me and my brother saw 2 states apart. If they did their research, they'd know that there was a rocket launch, and that's just the exhaust of a rocket launch. Okay, so get this. Oh, wow. Why so long? They just don't want you earning money because they want you earning shark cards. Ugh. Anyway, my point is that the UFOs that are posted on, that's a contrail. That's an airplane contrail. It's just overexposed, high contrast, vibrant. No idea what that is. Another light in the sky, probably a plane. On Reddit, the footage that people put forward is mostly 99% lights in the sky. There's never anything else. Hmm. Yeah. So lights in the sky. Okay. Just lights in the sky. Another plane or a satellite. That's what we're dealing with on the public forums. Is That's what we're looking at. And because of the sightings I saw years ago, I keep going onto Reddit and UFOs and YouTube because I want to see if there's any videos that resemble something that I saw, and I never see it. Does that mean that what I saw was extraordinary? No. I just think that the majority of things that people believe are unidentified flying objects tend to be of aircraft in the sky, because these people are mistaking a plane flying towards them with its headlights pointed in your direction as being a UFO. And again, I keep saying I'm the world's biggest skeptical believer, because most of the stuff that's posted is complete trash, unfortunately. If you believe in UFOs, though, I'd love to hear about it in the comments for this video. I should probably stop it here because I've discussed some of the UFOs, some of the projects, some of the individuals that were involved in the government project, but I'm sort of going around in circles now and repeating myself. So, at the risk of repeating myself, I will end it here. But for those of you that want to tune in next time, we're live every day, same time, same place, twitch.tv/DailyTakeaway. We're live at 1 p.m. GMT, 8 a.m. Eastern Seaboard, 2 p.m. Central European, 9 p.m. Asian, 10 p.m. Australian. And if you've got any comments, write them down below. The links to our social medias will be put in the video description. If you want to take part in another UFO podcast, please reach out to me through either Discord, Twitter, Instagram, or through the comments section. And I will see you tomorrow, same time, same place, for some more takeaway. Thank you very much for watching.